Good morning, everyone. The webinar will begin in 5 minutes. While waiting, I do encourage you to download the handout that is available under the Handouts tab on the control panel. But while we wait for the webinar to begin, we do have Deborah Easton on the line with us. Deb, in what ways do you find that asking questions is more effective than making statements? I also welcome you, all of you that are on the line, to send me any comments that you might have about this question through the questions function on the control panel. So Deb, in what ways do you find that asking questions is more effective than making statements?
Well, I think we'll find throughout the hour that there are quite a few ways that asking questions is more effective than making statements. One, I think for many of us is any situations in which we find ourselves talking too much, where we should be listening more. If we can go into the situation reminding ourselves that I want to hear other people's point of view, not just hear myself talk. That's probably the number one use of asking questions for many people. There's all kinds of other circumstances in which asking questions is much more effective. Coaching conversations instead of making presentations, we need to make it a dialogue. I've even found over the years in doing training that every couple of years it seems even more important to ask questions, because every couple of years we all change in terms of society, and we change in terms of our expectations of having a voice, and that can even be a generational type of switch that I've seen over the years. I'm assuming that you don't have an opportunity to ask many questions while you are doing your side hustle refereeing job, though, huh, Patrick?
No, well, sometimes. Those of you that don't know, I do referee high school and youth sports. Normally, the questions I get from coaches are more along the lines of, are you crazy? Are you blind? Something like that. But then, some coaches, they'll ask, well, why did you make that call, or what did you see? And I'll give them my interpretation, and I'll turn it back to them. I'll say, well, what did you see? And typically when we do that, we get into a better dialogue, other than a screaming match. So.
So if we're watching television and we see the referee and the coach having a dialogue, we know that questions have been asked of each other there instead of debate, screaming match going on.
Well, and a lot of times also, coaches aren't always clear on all of the rules, whether they think they are or they don't. Most of them don't exactly understand all the rules, so a lot of times they'll ask, well, what is the rule? And I will, and then I'll repeat to them, what we've learned through all our training. And then, a lot of times the coach will be like, oh, okay, I was wrong. I didn't understand it that way. So.
Yeah, and that's a great example, because that's really what asking questions is all about, creating better understanding so that a shouting match or a debate or just one of those conversations where we go round and round and round, and after 20 minutes finally discover that we're both saying the same thing, but we haven't been listening to each other.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I think there's a wide variety of reasons why asking questions can be very effective and can actually be influential as well.
Right.
Have we had any suggestions from anyone who has logged on to the webinar?
We have not. Nobody has, but we are getting right at time. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, How to Ask Effective and Influential Questions. Since we want to continue to deliver these informational webinars for you while practicing social distancing, we are delivering this webinar remotely. Your presenter, Deb Easton, will be presenting from her office and me from mine. My name is Patrick Allen. I'm the program manager for Kent State Center for Corporate and Professional Development's public open enrollment programs. Our center specializes in providing employee development for partnering in organizations in Northeast Ohio and around the world. We offer training as both public open enrollment programs that are currently being delivered live and virtually via Zoom, and also customized programs delivered live and virtual or at your location. I am joined today by Kent State facilitator Deborah Easton. I will be serving as your host, and Deborah will be our presenter for today. Deborah has been a communications coach for over 30 years and provides audiences with practical and effective advice for communicating with colleagues, customers, and direct reports. Her techniques for one-to-one interactions and group communications provide participants with practical strategies for handling difficult situations. She adapts every program to the unique needs of the organizational cultures and also the individual learner. She has partnered with Kent State Center for Corporate and Professional Development to provide a broad range of communication skills programs for organizations such as NASA Glenn Research Center, the Metro Health System, Cleveland Clinic, St. Gobain, the National Interstate Insurance Company, and many others. Her most requested training topics include interpersonal communication skills, coaching accountability, dealing with difficult behaviors, and her always popular communication strategies for generations working together. Prior to her work in facilitating professional development programs for adults, she taught communication courses in Kent State University's Department of Communication Studies, where she supervised 40 instructors of the Speech Fundamentals program. She also taught in Kent State's Graduate School of Management and holds a master's degree in speech communications from Kent State University. Everyone in attendance has been muted to avoid any background noise for many of the over 150 participants. We do encourage you to ask questions at any point during the hour. You can submit your questions to me in writing using the control panel on the right side of your screen. I will present your questions to Deborah as time permits throughout the webinar. Again, there is a handout available to you that summarizes today's presentation. It's located under the Handouts tab in the control panel. We encourage you to download it and take notes during today's presentation. We are recording today's webinar, and you will receive an email next week with a link to the recording after we conclude our time together. And now I would like to introduce Deborah Easton.
Thank you, Patrick. Good morning to everybody. How are you? Oh, wait, let me rephrase that question. When you hear a question like that, how are you? People always say, I'm fine, and that's not necessarily what they're really thinking. So maybe a better question would be, what has happened in your day so far? That might get me a little bit more information. And this is the kind of discussion we're going to have over the next hour, is talking about choosing the right type of question for the right type of situation. Prior to the program, we had asked when you signed up what kinds of questions you might have, and there was one on the list that I thought was really important. And the question was, questions in place of statements can seem disingenuous. How is this best avoided when the answer isn't truly in doubt? Well, if the answer isn't truly in doubt, then maybe the question is not the right thing to do. We need to keep in mind with communication that it is an art and not a science. Science implies rules. H2O is water, it just is. But with communication, it requires interpretation. So that's what we're going to be taking a look at with regard to asking questions today, is in what kinds of situations can we utilize questions appropriately? How should we interpret the type of question to ask? So we'll start with some of the fundamentals here with just the right type of question, and then we'll get into more specifics about utilizing particular questions in particular situations. And I'm hoping that by the time we have finished today, you have a list of questions that may be more effective for you to be asking in a wide variety of situations. So our first dilemma here in choosing the right type of question is, what really is your goal in asking the question? Oftentimes we don't even stop and think about that. We just simply ask the question. Obviously, the most simplistic type of question and goal is to simply attain a yes or no answer. And there's a real easy way of determining whether your question will reach this goal, and that is begin the question with these verbs. If you begin a question with these verbs, it will be a yes or no question. For example, take a look at this question. Is this boring? I'm hoping so far the answer to that is no. But that's a yes or no question. It doesn't require really any more answer than yes or no. Sometimes your more talkative people will give you the answer anyway, but that doesn't mean that's what you actually asked for. Or do you want to buy the car today? If you're trying to close the deal, so to speak, get final commitment, obviously we ask that yes or no question. And we have the one I think that gets asked in most living rooms, and that is, can I have control of the remote? And if it's in your house the same way it is in my house, the answer is probably no. Have you been to Italy? You see how by beginning the questions with these verbs, it is a yes or no question, and therefore a yes or no answer. And if you're dealing with someone who is very literal or who is not necessarily very responsive, they are only going to give you a yes or no answer. For example, those of you who may have preteens or teenagers at home, we oftentimes make the mistake of asking these yes or no questions, asking them, so, did you have a good day at school today? No. Well, is there anything that you learned that was interesting? No. Well, should you quit school and perhaps get a full-time job? Yeah. Wait, what? I mean, that's how the conversation goes because we've asked the yes or no questions. We're getting a yes or no answer. Now, we can also utilize these same words for deciding options, but we need to add one word, and that is the word which. If you add the word which plus these verbs, as we took a look at on the previous slide, we are going to get one option or the other. And so again, we're controlling the type of answer that we are receiving by the way in which we're asking the question. So which restaurant do you want to go to this Friday? Not, well, where do you want to go? Because then it opens up, well, I was there this way and that way, and I was there that last week, and I don't know. But which restaurant pins them down just a little bit more. And do you want coffee or tea? Again, a limited option type of question. Should we keep talking or move on? Now think about that one for a moment. You're in a meeting and we've had a long discussion, and typically the question will be something like, okay, is everybody all right with this? And some wise guy in the meeting will say, no, I'm not all right. I need another cup of coffee. And then a couple other people say, I need another cup of coffee. Next thing you know, there's a break in the middle of your meeting that you hadn't planned. So being specific about the wording of the question, should we keep talking or move on, keeps us from discussing who needs their coffee refilled. So you can see how fundamental that this actually is, but I guarantee you right now that many of the questions that you need to be asking may not be in these first two categories. They may actually need to be in this third category. I need to uncover more information. And in this case, what I need to be doing is asking the who, what, where, when, how, and the sometimes why question, and I'll address why that is sometimes why in a moment. But think about it. If you ask somebody, do you want to have Mexican food tonight? No. Well, are you hungry for Italian? No. Well, there's a German restaurant in town. Do you want to go there? No, not really. You see how it's not getting us anywhere? And it ends up being more of an interrogation and a very frustrating conversation. If instead we had asked, what would you prefer to eat this evening? Where would you prefer to eat this evening? Now we're bound to get more specifics. So take a look at this question. How should we proceed? Instead of asking, well, do you have any ideas what we do next? No. I mean, I do, but I don't really want to commit to them. But by asking, how should we proceed? It opens up the expectation that I want to hear your point of view. I'm not giving you an option of saying, no, I don't have any ideas and keeping them to yourself. Or what are the action items from today's meeting? I'm impressed by how many people are incorporating this at the end of their meetings because so often this is not asked. If your meeting is over an hour long, people remember best the first thing they heard, the last thing they heard, and then probably won't even remember any of what happened in the middle. So by asking what are the action items from today's meeting, at the very least, you're stimulating people's memory of everything that was discussed in that meeting. A question like who else should be invited to our next meeting? Even in an interview, we have a tendency to ask questions like, well, can you give me an example of how your good customer service skills that you just said you have work? Yeah, I don't really have one right now, but instead, if I were to say, what is an example of how you provide good customer service skills? You see how that puts the interviewee a little bit more on the spot. It requires an answer. Now, I wish I could tell you that this is magic dust, that this will force people into giving you more information. They may still stay closed on you. But it's important that we understand the contrast between these types of questions, especially if you're frustrated with the answers that you're receiving. And this isn't just in interviews or in meetings, it could be in the way in which you ask questions in your emails, for example. Are you getting yes or no responses when you really needed more of an explanation of why? Well, perhaps it's because of the way the question was worded in the email you sent to them. So let's just take a look for a moment at these contrasts. For example, if you take a look at the left-hand column, these are the limited choice or the yes or no questions. And on the right-hand column are how you would turn that around to an open-ended question. So for example, on the left-hand column, are there any questions? Very typical question that's asked at the end of a meeting. That is asked so often that when people hear, are there any questions? What they actually just heard was, see you bye, meeting done. And so nothing happens until everybody leaves the room and then maybe a couple people wander back in and they ask the question they felt like they probably shouldn't ask in front of everybody because everybody was itching to get out of the meeting. And now you know what we have? The meeting after the meeting, where true decisions end up being made. So then an email goes out to everybody about the decision that was made at the meeting, and they're saying, but wait, I was at that meeting. I don't remember that decision. And that's because we didn't ask, what questions do you have? And then wait. And maybe I should put an extra step in there. What questions do you have? And then shut up and wait. Because being willing to pause and wait for the answer is very important in asking questions appropriately. But think about that. What questions do you have? I cannot tell you how many times as a facilitator, if I'm just patient enough, really critical questions will arise, even though people are anxious to get out the door at the end of a training program. If it's the question that somehow I was unable to answer throughout our time together, they will stay because that's a what's in it for me, and that's what they came for. Take a look at the second question. Do you understand? Think of how many times we ask people that question. Do you understand? Now, think about what their most typical answer is. Yeah. In the back of their mind thinking, no, I really don't, but I don't want you to think I'm stupid, so I'm going to go ask somebody else. But look at the alternative question. What is the first step you will take as a result of our conversation? If they're unable to answer that question, it's a pretty good indication that they really don't understand. Or even a question like, what is an example of how you will utilize this information? If they can give a good example of how they will put the steps into action, now you know they truly understand. But think about how busy we are and how the do you understand question comes out of our mouths so quickly. And we're practically walking past the person as they're saying yes and not even stopping and waiting to hear if they actually do understand. Or the question, is there anything else? Oh, customer service, this question drives me crazy, especially when the person says it so quickly. Is there anything else? Anything else? Instead, the question should be, how can I assist you further? Or let's say you have a chronic complainer in your office. Maybe you've decided to use the question on the left-hand side of this slide to try to get them out of your office. Is there anything else? A chronic complainer is going to say, yeah, there's like 100 other things, and probably sit down. But if I say, what else should we discuss? And put a time frame in there. What else should we discuss within the 5 minutes that we have left for this conversation? Notice how that time frame can be very influential, and then stick to the time frame. Even if it's a pretty big issue, say, okay, we've agreed we only had 5 more minutes on this conversation. Let's set up a time to talk about this tomorrow at 2 o'clock. When you come in, however, I would like you to have solutions in mind so that we will spend our 20 minutes tomorrow discussing solutions. You see how that has given you much more control over the chronic complainer situation than is there anything else? That brush off question trying to get them out of your face. And this last one is in particular an example for those of you on the list who are in IT. I noticed there are several of you who have signed up for today's program who are in IT. This came up in a program that I was facilitating for an IT group. And it was very typical that when an IT person had to go back to someone's office and help them with some problem they were having with their computer, and it was a recurring problem, that they were getting so frustrated that they would ask, did you do what I told you to do last time I was here? And of course, that's going to put people on the defensive. Now, you can see why the IT person is really frustrated. It's the third time they've had to talk about it. But think about how much better the question, what steps have you taken since we last talked? How much better that would be. Because now I know where their level of understanding is. The first way of wording it, did you do what I told you to do? Yeah, and nothing worked. Okay, you have no picture of what they've actually tried. So by asking what steps have you taken since we last talked, and then keeping your hands out of there and saying, okay, show me what the steps are, you have a better picture of where the disconnect is between your instructions and the steps that they're actually taking. And so just this little change in the wording between the is, are, was, were, can, could, should, did, does kinds of questions to the who, what, where, when, how, and sometimes why can have tremendous impact on the results that you achieve throughout the conversation. And if you haven't noticed, notice that limited choice questions will not encourage a non-responsive person to reveal more information. Some people are very literal. For some people, culturally, it is a sign of respect that if someone in a particular position asks them a yes or no question, it is a sign of respect to answer only yes or no and not take more time than is allotted for the conversation. So there could be many reasons why people are only giving you the yes or no and not additional information. And the wording of this question can be critical. So speaking of questions, we have a polling question that we would like to ask you. What percentage of the questions that you frequently ask, and that's currently, what percentage are currently open-ended questions? Okay, Patrick, take it away.
Okay, I will launch that right now. Okay, just about 5 more seconds or so, and I will show the results.
Okay.
It looks like about 80% say up to 50%.
Up to 50%. Okay. All right, great. Now, here is our second question. And that second question is, what percentage of your questions should be open-ended questions?
Okay, about another 5 seconds, and again, I'll close it and then show the results. So it looks like about 45% say 75%.
Okay.
Followed
So
up by, go ahead.
okay. So 75% of you are saying, you at first said 80% of you are asking up to about 50% of your questions are open-ended, and now you're telling me that nearly 75 or 100% of your questions should actually be in the uh, open-ended category. And so that's a good sign, because that's a recognition now of some of the difference that we can make simply by the format of the question. And I know this seems pretty fundamental, but I'm hoping by the examples you can see just how critical this could be in some of the circumstances that you're facing. So next time you go into a meeting, for example, or you're putting a meeting agenda together because you're going to facilitate the meeting, put the meeting agenda together in the form of open-ended questions, and then send that out before the meeting so that people are prepared to respond to your questions. This is especially important if you have many detail-oriented, analytical, maybe even some perfectionists who don't like to answer until they know that their answer is perfect, or all the detail will be in the answer. Asking those open-ended questions in your meeting agenda prior to the meeting can gain more participation during that meeting. So this is the first element that is important for us to take a look at. Now, let's take a look at some of the ways in which questions also can work or backfire on us. And that's where I'd like to take a look next. And that is avoiding questions that backfire. And you'll notice by the look of the person I have on the screen there, a question obviously put them on the defensive. So one of the things that we need to watch for is that the negative form of yes or no questions could put people on the defensive. And the negative form would be those same verbs, but with the not attached to it. For example, haven't I always been there for you? Yeah, but I'm not sure how to answer that question. Or perhaps you're doing a coaching conversation. Performance isn't what it needs to be. Asking the person, can't you get here earlier? Really puts them on the defensive, and there may be good reasons why they can't get there earlier. But if we had instead of asked it that way, what is inhibiting your ability to be here right at 9 a.m.? Now we're opening it up. There's less emotion involved in the conversation. We can really get some background information that we need to move forward into solution. Or, well, wouldn't my way be a better way? No. Well, why not? Because you're stupid. Notice how, as soon as I put people on the defensive, they're going to respond defensively. And now I may not even recognize that I asked the question this way. Wouldn't my way be a better way? But I recognize their defensiveness, and I'm wondering why. Well, don't you think I'm an expert on this? And now we have a power struggle. We didn't have to have that power struggle. Or, don't you get this yet? Now, obviously, I am using a bit of an exaggeration here in my tone of voice and in my word choice, but you can see how adding the not to these yes or no questions, how they really aren't focused on solving the situation. They come across as a power play toward people. So this is one category, the negative form of yes or no questions. Another category are the whys. You'll notice on the previous slide I mentioned that be careful of asking too many why questions, because that can put people on the defensive. Things like, why are you on your phone right now? Hopefully it's because you're listening and watching this webinar. Or, why didn't you come to me sooner? Okay, now think about that. You're obviously upset that you're hearing information at the last minute, maybe almost too late for you to do anything about it. Why didn't you come to me sooner? Well, I'm putting them on the defensive. Now, stop and think about that for a moment. If I'm putting them on the defensive with that question, maybe I have put them on the defensive when I react to negative information in the past. How do I respond when people tell me no? How do I respond when people tell me bad news? Sometimes people wait to tell me bad news because they know I kill the messenger and they don't want to be the one that's in that position this day. So be careful of the why questions that put people on the defensive. Instead of why didn't you come to me sooner, it's better in this instance to actually make a statement first. This is the type of information that I need to be aware of at least 3 days earlier than I am in this situation, because then here's how I can fix it. So in this circumstance, it's actually a good example of how the question is worse than making the statement. Now, here's another category that can backfire. Questions that blame put people on the defensive. Now, I want you to imagine you're in a meeting and it's being led by the CEO of your organization, and the CEO asks the question, whose idea was this? Now, whether you're in the room or whether you're on Zoom, what you're going to find when that question is asked, whose idea was this, is that all of the eye contact suddenly goes away from the camera or away from everybody else. It goes down to the desk until we find out that the CEO thinks it was a good idea, and then all of a sudden everybody looks up. Innocent question. Whose idea was this? But it always reminds me when I hear people ask this in a meeting, it reminds me of my two dogs. One of them invariably will do something they're not supposed to. And my question puts them on the defensive when I say, who did this? And both tails go down, right? That's what I imagine happens to human beings, is that the proverbial tail goes down when the question is, whose idea was this? Or, who told you that? Oh, good. Let me just ask this question so that you can throw somebody else under the bus, right? Who cares who went wrong? It's what went wrong and how do we fix it? What is the misinformation? How do we straighten out the grapevine? It's not who told you that. Or In our tendency in today's society for sarcasm, sometimes the question is, how can an intelligent person like you possibly think that way? I cannot tell you how many conversations about politics I have overheard where this question was asked. I'm just going to let that one sit there by itself for a moment. So these are two categories of questions that can backfire: the why questions and the questions that blame people. Now, there's another category here that's an interesting one, and that is a question that implies scorekeeping. It diverts from the real issue. And I'm going to admit that I have a hard time stopping myself from asking these kinds of questions when I get really frustrated. For example, take a look at this question. How many times do I have to tell you that the trash pickup is on Monday now? All right, now think for a moment about this question. I have asked it, how many times do I have to tell you? I've put that right up front. That stands out as what the issue is. Now, how's the person going to respond? I don't know. I don't remember you telling me once. This is the third time that I have told you this. Well, again, I don't remember you telling me once. Now, think about this for a moment, everybody. Is this the real issue? It's what's frustrating me, but it's not the root of the problem. The root of the problem is that the trash is not out at the end of the driveway on Monday. So notice what a better phrasing would be. How can we make sure the trash will be on the curb for Monday morning pickup? See, the first way this is worded, how many times do I have to tell you, is scorekeeping. It's all about the problem. The second way we word the question talks about solution. How can we make sure the trash will be on the curb for Monday morning pickup? Or maybe this is one of the kids' job duties for getting an allowance. Then how can you make sure that the trash will be on the curb for Monday morning pickup? And if they know it's their responsibility, then you is not going to be a problem word in there. Here's the other example. Isn't this the third time we've talked about this? Again, you can see how the emphasis is on how many times we've talked about it. It's not on the solution. So instead, it should be, what are the steps you have taken so far and what should be planned for next steps? This is great for people who are constantly saying, oh, this will never work. I just can't do it. I just can't get this. Instead of, why is this the third time we've talked about this? Isn't this the third time we've talked about this? Simply saying, what are the steps you have taken so far? Well, I've tried and nothing works. Okay, I'm going to walk over to your workstation, or let's share the screen with each other. Show me what you're doing so far, and then we can talk about what to plan for next steps. See, instead of going back and forth about how many times we've talked about it, I want to get this inert person to take action. And so again, we are completely clouding the real issue, which in both instances here and in many instances is actually about taking an action. We're clouding that by talking about the scorekeeping. So next time you have that tendency to want to say, this is the third time. I mean, how many times do I have to stop yourself? Ask yourself, what's the real issue? What needs to be done? And let's ask a question about solutions. All right. So I'm hoping that these questions that backfire, if you see yourself in any of these, there have been some suggestions there for how to turn that around. Now, let's take a look at some specific situations. For example, what if you are in the middle of a perplexing dilemma? Our tendency is to ask ourselves the question, what should I do? And that can be a mistake. Think about the last time you were really mad at somebody. You were just really fed up with what was going on. And you asked yourself the question, what should I do? Well, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'm going to do to them what they did to me. Let's see how they like it. Problem is, when people do things we don't like, half the time they don't even know they did it, or they thought they were doing something that was helpful. They didn't realize it was something that would upset us. And so when we say, oh, I'm going to throw back at them what they're throwing at me, it doesn't do me any good. Maybe I've asked myself the question, what should I do? Well, you know what? I'm just going to stop talking to her. I'm just going to stop talking to her because I just can't take it anymore. Now, that can be a real mistake, because instead of asking, what should I do, jump into solution before I've really figured out the problem is a mistake. Instead, think about this question. What don't I want to have happen? All right, I really don't want to lose the relationship with that person. Or, you know what, I don't really like them, but I still have to have a relationship with that person because they are my colleague. So what I don't want to have happen is I don't want to lose that relationship. And by throwing back at them what they threw at me, I'm going to lose my dignity. I don't want to do that either. So that question that I ask myself, what don't I want to have happen, can help ground me in what the best solution is. Now, think about work situations. Let's say engineering has developed a brand new product, and they're taking it to the manufacturing floor. And manufacturing floor is just giving pushback and pushback. This will never work. I'm not going through this again. If we stop and ask the question, okay, what are you picturing? What don't you want to have happen? And maybe they say to me, look, we don't want to go through retooling all of the equipment and all of the molds, going through all kinds of breakage and all kinds of problems, only to discover in 6 weeks you're going to change your mind about what this product should be in the first place. See, now I know what their objection really is, and we can work through the solution on that. Instead of this being a power play between the people who are going to implement the idea and the people who came up with it, now it's a collaborative solution between those two groups. Or let's say there's a change. You want to convince the person to whom you report, right? You want to convince them, we need to implement this change. We need to spend money on this. And they've been giving you pushback. Maybe I need to ask them this question. What don't you want to have happen? Okay, I don't want there to be this major hit to the budget. Okay, fine. But let's take a look at how the budget is taking a hit based on what we're doing right now. See, now you know where that objection is really, really coming from and how to address it. So this one question, I know I've spent a lot of time just on this one question, but it's a very, very powerful question. What don't I want to do? A lot of times we know what we don't want, but we don't know what we do. Now, once I've asked this, then there are several follow-up questions that make sense. What can't I change? I can't change the weather. All right. So that's one of the parameters within which I have to work. What do I have the power to affect? Boy, that's a great coaching question for those of you who are coaching others on projects. Everybody sees what constrains them. They oftentimes don't stop and think about what they do have the power to affect. And a lot of times they think, oh, I don't have the power to do that. Only management can do that. No, you really do. You have power to affect that change. They just don't know it yet. Next question, what would the perfect solution look like? Okay, let's look at what's perfect. And then what steps can I take within the constraints, like the weather, to reach as much of the perfect solution as possible? And then maybe we have to put a time limit in. Can I live with this solution for how long? Maybe after all of this, you've decided, maybe I just need to keep my mouth shut for a little while longer. Well, how long is a little while longer? Because if it goes too long, maybe I'll build resentment that I'm never being heard, even though I'm the one who's not speaking up. but how long can I live with this solution? When should we revisit it? And what would cause me to change this decision? If in action planning, we talk to people about these last two questions and they know that there are going to be opportunities to tweak and fine tune the idea, they're more likely to get on board with the idea. So when you're in a perplexing situation, these are a series of really important questions to ask. Right. Now, I know there's a lot there, so I'm going to pause for just a second to give you an opportunity to jot down anything on there that you'd like to. Okay, now, what about when I want to influence someone? One of the things we have a tendency to do in influencing someone is putting forth our own solutions instead of collaborating, getting their ideas. People are more committed to ideas they come up with than ideas they're following from somebody else. Those of you who are coaching, you may be making the mistake of giving solutions in the question. Why don't you talk to her about it? That's a solution. You want this person to feel accountable. You want this person to feel powerful in coming up with their own ideas. So it's better to ask questions like, what have you already tried? What was the result? What do you imagine happens when we fail to call the customer back on time? And following that up with, how does that result affect you? Sometimes you have people that even when they're in customer service don't care as much about the impact on the customer as they do about their own convenience. And so asking those two questions together can be very powerful. What do you imagine happens when we fail to call them back? Well, they're calling back and screaming and hollering. Well, what effect does that have on you? Well, I'm the one who has to deal with it, although I just transfer them to you. Okay, well, that's no longer an option. You're going to need to deal with this. So what can we do up front to prevent the screaming and hollering to begin with? That's a series of coaching questions. What would need to happen for us to move forward? Again, those of you trying to influence upper management, what would need to happen for us to move forward with this idea? And they probably will give you some sarcastic response about pigs flying. But once you get past the sarcasm, bring it back down to the serious and find out what the conditions are. And then go back to the previous set of questions on the previous slide and ask yourself, what can I control? What can I bring about to get us into that situation where now everything has fallen into place and we can move forward? And it's not a bad idea to ask people what happened that changed your mind. If you get people finally doing what you're asking them to do, asking this question, what happened that changed your mind? I just got sick and tired of you complaining about it. That doesn't necessarily tell me that they have commitment to doing what I've asked them to do consistently from this point forward. So this can be a very revealing question as well. What happened that changed your mind? And then we have questions to ask myself in a conflict conversation. Those of you who have read Crucial Conversations will recognize this question. How do I picture myself or my views as righteous and the other person as a villain? I go into a conversation with that mindset. There's just no way that we can really come up with a compromise because one of us will have to be right and the other one will have to be wrong. How can I help the other person feel safe in the conversation? We don't think about that. We think about what I want to get across. I don't care whether you feel safe with this or not. Boy, this is one that I really have to stop myself because I'm so accustomed to putting my presentation together. It's what I do for a living. What questions should I be asking them that I don't understand? Have I been playing Dr. Phil? Do I think I have them totally figured out? Have I been talking to other people and we've together been playing Dr. Phil's? If that's the case, then I better back up and figure out what questions I should be asking them. And then the question is, what do I need? What do I need? What choices do we have? And where am I willing to compromise? Take a look at these questions. They're the kinds of things that if I ask myself these questions, I'm less likely to go in there with both barrels loaded. I'm more likely to stop and listen instead of doing all the talking. These can be very, very important questions when going into conflict. And finally, the situation I want to take a look at is building relationships. Good questions like, what do you need that I can provide? Certainly a lot better question than, what do you need from me? Now, even the question, what can I do for you, is a great question, but it's been written in so many management manuals that it's become a have a nice day kind of communication where people don't even believe we mean it anymore. Change up the wording. What do you need that I can provide? See, they're hearing it differently. It sounds more genuine because the wording is different than what I have been asking. Or maybe it's a tough circumstance. How can I make this topic easier for you to talk about? Uh, I just don't want to talk about it right now. Okay, but this is kind of a crisis situation. We do need to make a decision within the next 10 minutes. Where can we start on this that will be easier for you to discuss? A good question for an interview. What situations have you had that were enjoyable because they were challenging? In an interviewee will say, well, I like to be challenged. Well, tell me about those situations. What were enjoyable? That's going to give me a lot more information. And maybe if I'm trying to figure out whether they're going to be a good fit for the team, maybe I can add words to that. What situations with other people have you had that you enjoyed because they were challenging? And if the answer is, oh, here's my situation and I came out the winner, maybe you need to ask yourself, is that the collaborative type of person I want to hire? Or if you could change one thing about your current circumstances, what would that be? Great interview question, great performance review question. This is a great question for a relationship with a person who believes they're an expert on everything. They have their idea. What would happen if we did the opposite? What do you see would happen there? A lot of times it talks the expert into another idea because they're talking through it and saying, well, I guess this part would work. Yes, I could see this would work. So yes, I approve of this. Now, you need to get past the ego part of that they decided it's their idea now. But hey, at least we're moving forward with some idea that isn't crazy anymore. And what are the things you want to know? So I know I've thrown a lot of questions at you throughout our time together, but that was really kind of the point, to provide you with some additional options. So I hope as you're thinking about asking effective, influential questions, remember that knowing your goal and wording the question accordingly is important. Being conscious of tone of voice is also important, especially with those why questions. Being careful of the questions that create defensiveness that we talked about, the negative forms of yes or no, the why questions, the blame, the scorekeeping questions. Consider those questions in the important situations instead of making statements. Remember, above all, to listen to the answer. Absolutely critical. And one other piece of information before I turn it over to your questions, and that is, here are a couple of good books. The one on the right, The 7 Powers of Questions, by Dorothy Leeds, is one of a series of books she has about questions, and it's been around for a while. But Change Your Questions, Change Your Life is good for us both personally and in, as you can see, their leadership coaching. So these are some options that we have for you. So let me make sure that I ask the final question appropriately. What questions do you have? She said, now she will shut up and wait.
Okay, great. Thanks, Deb. You must have did a great job of answering all their questions. We don't have many. One person wonders what to do when you ask direct reports questions, but they either don't answer them or give you too generic of answers.
Okay, if it's too generic of an answer, then I want to ask for an example. right? Say something like, "Help me picture this. What is an example of you putting that into practice, or what is an example of how that has happened before?" Um, and sometimes people really have a hard time with that. So give them a little bit of time and say, if you need a little bit of time to think about that, take 30 minutes and then let's talk about this again in 30 minutes. And give them time to go back in recent history to figure out what that example is. And the first part of that question was,
When they just won't answer your questions.
okay, then that needs to be the issue. Instead of trying to get whatever it was you were seeking in the original question, say, okay, it looks like we have quite a dilemma. There's information that I need shared so that we can move forward, but you're not sharing that information. What concerns do you have about sharing that information? See, now the issue isn't what you went into it with. Now the issue is the fact that they aren't responding. And so we need to put the other issue aside for a moment and talk about the conversation. Sometimes we just have to talk to each other about how we need to talk to each other. And if they're absolutely refusing to respond, um, be very careful of when you ask that question, what is happening here? Why is this information not forthcoming? Shut up, okay? Because if you speak too quickly, your tendency is going to be to start asking the yes or no questions. Well, don't you feel safe telling me this information? Are you afraid of the way I'm going to respond to you? I mean, you're going to be interrogating, and that's going to make the situation worse. So ask your open-ended question: what is happening here with the lack of response? And then be quiet. See, sometimes unresponsive people, they like it when you're the one who's uncomfortable with the silence. Sometimes we have to use the silence in reverse so that the discomfort goes on the other end.
Okay, great. I think we probably only have time for about one more question. I have a hard time stopping myself from talking over people during conflict. Will asking questions help?
Yes, absolutely. Especially if you utilize the questions that I need to ask myself first. But in going into the conflict, if you've played Dr. Phil, and we're all guilty of doing that, by the way, you're going in where you've already prescribed or you've already diagnosed what's happening, and now you already have your prescription for what needs to happen instead. And that's a big mistake in conflict. We need to go in like you're the doctor seeing this patient for the very first time. What don't you know? And that will help us prevent talking instead of asking the questions.
Okay, great. Okay, well, that does conclude our time together. We would like to thank you for attending and do encourage you to register for Deb's next upcoming program, which is Enhancing Interpersonal Communication Skills, which will be delivered live and virtually via Zoom on Wednesday and Thursday, March 10th and 11th. You can register for that program at www.kent.edu/yourtrainingpartner. You can also learn about all our other programs by contacting us at 330-672-3416 or at your training partner at kent.edu. We can bring all of our programs to your organizations, both live and virtually, and tailor them to fit your needs. You can join our extensive list of clients and bring Kent State to your organization. We also encourage you to register for our next webinar, which is on Friday, March 19th, where we will be discussing strength-based leadership with Kent State facilitator Christy Frieden. During this webinar, you will learn to understand the importance of leading through strengths, identify individual strength and specific ideas for strength development, and recognize strengths in others and have meaningful strength-based dialogue. Registration for this webinar will be opening soon, And for those of you attending live, you will be asked to complete a short survey. Please complete this survey so that we can be assured that we are bringing you the most usable and relevant content possible. You will also receive a follow-up email early next week with a link to view a recording of today's webinar. On behalf of Kent State's Center for Corporate and Professional Development and our presenter, Deborah Easton, thank you again for attending today and have a great weekend.